So recently, or, recently by my timeline, I released a video on the original Metroid for the NES, right? And as part of that, I talked about the word Metroidvania. To recap, I don't like the word Metroidvania. I know that's a daring and bold opinion. That's the kind of opinion that really gets the ladies going. The alternative that I prefer is Mapformer. It kind of captures the exploration angle, and it also captures the platforming aspect of it, you know? It's a wee bit of a cheeky pun. It's a bit of a cheeky pun there, but I like it. Now, this being YouTube, of course, I got a bunch of comments about that. And I would really love to come in here and say, like, oh, well, I got some comments from some real idiots who are talking complete rubbish, but, like, this is the problem, man, is that my community is actually, on the whole, pretty good. I'm going to need you guys to turn it up a notch next time. I'm going to need you to come in and say, if you don't like the word Metroidvania, you're actually two Hitlers in a trench coat. But yes, I did get some interesting responses, and what I mean by interesting is responses that I still disagree with, but that I would like to respond to, because they got me to consider my position more thoroughly. Now, I am going to remove the usernames. If you left one of these comments and you would like to claim responsibility for it, then yeah, please do. Please go ahead, leave a response to this as well. Take the conversation further, as I'm sure you will. But of course, this is all publicly available information. I'm sure you can track down the original commenters very, very easily. So, all I'm going to say about that is behave like an adult. And you know what I mean by that? I don't want to go down my comments and find somebody saying, oh, Shoogles said you're a dafty in a follow-up video, because I didn't. I'm not going to say that. Right? Don't go putting words in my mouth. Don't go tracking these people down. Just behave like a normal human being. It's fine. We're talking about video game genres here. First comment here. I guess I've never thought of Metroid games as Metroidvanias because everything you find is a permanent upgrade, whereas Vania brought equipable weapons, in-game shops, and stuff like that to the table. So you have personal agency over your character's build. This is the first of what I'm going to call the Metroid is not a Metroidvania trilogy, which is a bold stance to take. Castlevania is more combat focused in general, right? Because if you think of the hidden techniques in Super Metroid, all of those get you around the map easier. You've got the wall jump, the shine spark, all that stuff. In Castlevania, the hidden techniques make fights easier. Now, obviously you can prefer that, and that's totally fine, that's great. Totally support that. But I don't think that makes it an essential part of this genre, and there's a pretty simple reason for that, which is that Metroid doesn't have it. Metroid is a foundational game, if not the foundational game for this entire genre, so any definition that would exclude Metroid, I think is kinda tenuous. Technically, the original Metroid isn't a Metroidvania because the term was created in reference to Super Metroid and Symphony of the Night. There seems to be a lot of confusion about if this is a genre or if it's a movement. Keep in mind, at first it wasn't actually used to describe a genre, it was just used to describe certain Castlevania games. But if we are trying to talk about the genre, like a style or a category, then I think that that applies no matter when the term was coined. Like if it walks like a duck, swims like a duck, quacks like a duck, then that's a duck even before you have a word for it. Metroid cannot be a Metroidvania because it is a Metroid without the Castlevania aspects. Hollow Knight is an example that does not work as a Metroidvania because it borrows nothing from Castlevania. So what we seem to be saying here is that a game needs to copy Castlevania's mechanics specifically to be considered a part of this genre. No. Like, excluding Metroid is already tenuous enough, but now we're excluding the indie Metroidvania poster child as well? Like, if I went up to somebody and I said to them, Metroidvania, the first three games I think they would think of are Metroid, Castlevania, and then Hollow Knight. If your definition is excluding two of those major three games, then yeah, I think it might be too narrow. This is a big part of the problem with the word Metroidvania, is that it shackles the genre to these foundational games. Like, a game has to be exactly like Metroid, or more commonly Castlevania, in order to be a Metroidvania. But even though that's so specific, it's ironically still pretty vague, because we don't know exactly which parts of these two games we are taking for this to be considered a Metroidvania. Like, we have here somebody who is saying that Hollow Knight takes nothing from Castlevania because it doesn't specifically copy its mechanics. Doesn't that kind of stifle growth? Isn't it important that we move beyond these two games in this genre? I reject Mapformer because I don't think it's necessary for a game like this to be a platformer. To me, the essential elements of this loose genre are: 1. Needing to figure out how to progress is a major focus. It can be linear, but you have to find the way forward. 2. Ability upgrade based progression gating that allows you to pass previously impassable barriers and recontextualize much of the map. There's a lot of overlap with action-adventure, yes, but that's because action-adventure is so vast and so vague that it encompasses possibly the majority of video games. There's not a lot of overlap, you've just described an adventure game there. Like, not even an action-adventure game, everything you have said there perfectly describes Monkey Island. Action-adventure is actually a bit more strict than you might imagine. Action games have a focus on the interactions between the character and the enemies, think of stuff like Devil May Cry, and adventure is basically what you described there. It's puzzles given narrative context. Action-adventure, then, is stuff like Zelda. It's a game where you are moving through a world, unlocking new abilities to go back and solve puzzles in earlier areas. You're unlocking new levels by finding new power-ups and solving more puzzles, and along the way you're also fighting a lot of enemies. See, this is part of the problem, is that I think that video game genres are popularly quite, weirdly defined. Like, I've heard people call, Grand Theft Auto an action-adventure, when I would consider open world a different genre. Maybe that's me. Maybe I'm the maniac here. Platforming is not a small part of these games, right? It is essential for these games. Here's my logic. Metroid has a similar structure to Zelda. It's not exactly the same, but it's similar. The major differences are the inventory screen, the dungeons, and platforming. But, of course, Castlevania, which, as we've established, is definitely a Metroidvania game, it has an inventory screen, and you can get adventure games without dungeons, so the remaining mechanical distinction for me is platforming. The only way that you can make a side-scroller non-linear is to add height variation, it is to add platforming. I don't think that platforming is an optional or an incidental detail when it comes to these games. You decided that Dark Souls doesn't fit because it's focused less on interacting with the world and more on interacting with enemies. But why? Think about it, you're talking about vibes. Where is the line drawn? Okay, so here's my argument. Circle is the dodge roll button for combat. Triangle switches stances in combat. Square uses items, most of which are buffs for use in combat. The D-pad selects items and weapons and spells for combat. All of the bumpers and triggers are to attack and defend using the weapons and shields that you get in combat. The only application that these things have for exploring is to uncover illusory walls. So the majority of the controller is dedicated to combat. You spend a lot of the game in combat or figuring out how to get to the next combat encounter. The entirety of the multiplayer component is either to engage in combat with opponents or to have allies come and help you with combat. And when people describe their experiences with Dark Souls, they describe the amazing combat encounters that they had. You know, nobody's out here glazing the fucking bridge jump in Firelink, are they? I think it's just easier to classify Metroidvania as a style rather than a genre. They're a mishmash of gameplay elements from other genres formed into a specific style of game. There isn't really a hard line between where a Metroidvania begins and where it ends. It inhabits the same type of classification as Soulslikes. Like, this is one of the difficulties with game genres, right? Genre in other mediums is literally vibes-based. It's literally based on emotions, horror, romance, comedy, that sort of stuff. In games, it's instead the mechanical focus. You've got first-person shooter, you've got role-playing game. It results in a lot of cross-pollination. It's a lot easier to transfer mechanics between genres than tone. Like, take RPG mechanics, for example. They are now in a huge number of games, including the Metroidvania. So, where do we draw the line between genre, subgenre, and just a style of game? Yeah. But I do think that Metroidvania has a consistent enough suite of mechanics, as well as an overall focus on terrain and exploration, to mark it out as its own genre. Personally, I'm with you though. I don't think that Souls-like is its own genre. I think it is a particular style of action RPG. But then again, I've actually heard some people say that it's not actually about the mechanics in Souls-like, it's more about the mood. At this point, I'm just going to leave it to the Souls fans to fight that one out. Just make sure that nobody else is on your side though, or they will start crying about it. So what does Metroidvania actually mean? Well, the answer is seemingly that nobody has a clue. We all seem to have a guess or an opinion, like it's similar to Metroid and /or Castlevania, I guess. Except sometimes it's not even including Metroid. It's simultaneously really specific, it has to be like these two games, and also really vague because we don't know what it is exactly that we are taking from these two games. And that's also ignoring that these two are, in and of themselves, actually pretty different. Metroid is more focused on exploration, Castlevania is more focused on combat and RPG-esque character building. This is one of the many reasons I think Metroidvania is a pretty weak name. Love your videos, you sook. And I love Metroid even more. But I want to make a defense of the name Metroidvania for the genre simply because, in my opinion, language as a whole is more about community and people than dictionaries and institutions, right? Yes, that's true, and I am a part of that community. Roguelikes are games similar to Rogue, and adventure games are descendants of Colossal Cave Adventure. Now this is a wee bit of a tangent, but I thought it was interesting. Roguelike suffers from the exact same problem as Metroidvania. You can even see this with the existence of Roguelite, a game that is like Rogue, but not enough like Rogue to be a roguelike. I should be allowed to murder people. Take The Binding of Isaac, for example. Is it a roguelike or a roguelite? Well, apparently the difference is that roguelites have persistent character progress between runs. So, like, you finish a run and your character baseline levels up so that the next run is easier. So a lot of people say that The Binding of Isaac is a roguelike. Except that you can unlock the D6 for Isaac, which is objectively an enormous upgrade for the character as a baseline, so which is it? Well, the answer is that nobody fucking knows, because to a lot of people, that's not the difference between a light and a like in the first place. We are, all of us, talking past each other in like a million different ways. I do like the name adventure for that genre, though, because, yeah, you're right, it is named after the Colossal Cave Adventure, but it's still quite generic and quite descriptive, so I think it works even if you don't know that context. Like, if we were out here calling them Colossal Cave-ish, yeah, then I would have a problem. I kind of have rejected every alternative to the name Metroidvania because they either exclude core games from what I guess we can call the Metroidvania canon, or they're so broad they include games that aren't pertinent to the discussion. And I reject this notion that a name is invalid because it might take some homework to understand. Do you understand what I mean by romantic music without a whole bunch of context? I don't know, I think it comes from this embarrassment of gaming history, like musicians don't get embarrassed to say what they mean by Baroque music, but we're supposed to be embarrassed because our thing was made in the 1980s instead of the 1800s, or something. Aye, that's right, I'm very embarrassed by Metroid. Like what? The only way I could possibly disagree is if I secretly hate video games? I know that all words are based on pre-existing knowledge, that's how language works. The difference is that we're not out here calling romantic music Beethoven-like. If we were, wouldn't that be kinda disrespectful? Wouldn't that kind of belittle the contributions made by other composers? So many Metroid fans are angry that a term originally used to describe a Metroid-like Castlevania is now used to describe all platformers with maps and action RPG elements. Because despite Metroid having no ARPG stuff, how dare Castlevania share the spotlight? You know that you've made up a person to get angry at here, right? Like, nobody here has said anything of the sort. If anything, they've actually dismissed Metroid more than Castlevania. You have just made up an adversary in your head to get mad at. And you need to stop. Like, I'm saying this for your benefit more than mine, right? Seriously, it takes 2 clicks and you no longer exist to me anymore. You are not a problem. You are not on my radar. But what I'm saying is that you, for your own sake, need to cease that behaviour. Because it will fucking eat you up from the inside. Mapformer is equally ambiguous to someone unfamiliar with the definition of the genre because it just implies platformer with a map. Also, I think if we're being sticklers with definitions, it would be important to define a lot of the terms being used to build the definition itself. Right, I'm saying we need 2 things: a stronger definition and a more appropriate name. I am not saying that we need that name to be perfectly descriptive to capture every single element of the genre, and I'm also not saying that we need to define every single word we ever use. I think that's a wee bit reductio ad absurdum. Hands in the air, I have to admit, some of the confusion here is my fault. I did a little skit where somebody comes in on you playing a game and they don't know what a Metroidvania is. Like, I just thought that would be a funny bit, but yeah, it caused some confusion, like the comedy analysis balance was off a wee bit there. That's my bad. Mapformer makes me think the game is about forming maps. Is it not? By your own admission, there are Metroidvanias without maps. Additionally, there are Metroidvanias that do not feature any platforming in the traditional sense. Anytime you try to name a genre, you will run into issues like this, where there are either games that fall outside the new name's scope, or it's not easy enough to identify based on the name alone. Most often it's both. Now, first of all, again, all of those problems apply to Metroidvania as well. Like, that's not really disputing my points, that's kind of like admitting defeat. Nobody is saying Metroidvania is good, actually. Everybody's just saying we can't possibly imagine it being any different. This is a problem with every existing genre as well. Like, I talked about Zelda 2 as an example of a game that nominally fits the definition of a Metroidvania, but just based on sheer vibes alone, I don't think that it is a Metroidvania. But once again, that's still a problem even if we call it a Metroidvania. So, Metroidvanias without maps, right? Well, these games still have a very clear focus on the map. Metroid 1 has a clear focus on its map. It's just that you, the player, have to draw it. You don't get the game to fill it in for you. But yeah, more importantly, I don't think we need to be that literal. Like, there are RPGs where you play a predefined character, there are platforming games without platforms. But the thing is all of that aside, The main reason that I used the word Mapformer is because when I say it, you know exactly what I mean. There is no ambiguity, there is no confusion, there is nobody going away with a completely different idea of what the word means, because I've just taken a couple of minutes to explain it. Am I married to it? No, really. Like, I mean, listen, man, if God himself descends from the heavens and he says, actually, the term is search action, then sure, man. I mean, you're the boss. I'll get in line. But until that point, I am a lot more comfortable explaining myself when I can say the word Mapformer and trust that you guys are roughly on the same page. So, in summary, what have we learned? Fucking nothing important, man, don't worry about it. Here's why I dislike Metroidvania. Nobody can agree on a definition. It shackles the genre to these two games in people's minds, which kinda stifles growth. Those two foundational games are very different in the first place. I think that it's probably a bad idea to name a genre after a property owned by an incredibly litigious company. Plus, it's just an ugly portmanteau. Like, listen, Transylvania, Castlevania, brilliant, perfect, alright. Metroidvania? How long did it take you to come up with that one? This is why I wanted to use a new word, and the word that I just so happened to like the most was Mapformer. Is it going to set the world on fire? Is it going to be widely adopted? Do I expect it to change the face of games discourse forever? No, of course not. But that was never the point. You can still say Metroidvania. I mean, everybody's going to. That's just objective fact. People are still going to say Metroidvania, even in my comments. It's just that, very simply, when I say Mapformer, you know what I mean. Oh, and don't get me fucking started on Metroidvania. Like, for fuck's actual sake. Games where your progress is gated not by power-ups, but by your knowledge of the game and its systems. What, you mean a game where you have to puzzle out the solutions to puzzles using puzzle-solving techniques? Yeah, I think you already know what that genre is called. Mist-like.